Right, hello, this is Jeff Scott of Blackhawk Technical College, and right now I'm going to begin Chapter 9, which is entitled Navigation Controllers and Table Views. The class is 152-153, Mobile Web Development, iOS. It's our Swift class, and falling a little bit behind, but hopefully we'll be catching up soon. I'd still like to go through all 22 chapters, which means I've got a yeoman's test in front of me. I've got about 6 weeks and 14 chapters, which is more than 2 a week, but we'll do the best we can. So, Chapter 9 starts on page 301, and as the author mentions from the get-go, in this chapter we're going to talk about navigation controllers. In fact, if I can show you, this is the project, and it's kind of hard to see, I realize that, but we've got one thing right here, and in the past we've used view controllers, but this time we're going to create a navigation controller, and what you're going to see is we're going to have more than one screen. We have a second screen here that's called fonts, and a third screen here that's called font list view controller. This, I believe, is all of our available fonts, and these will be the ones that we've chosen. I could be wrong on that, but hopefully you notice when you look in here there are connections here, there's a connection here, and of course there's the beginning arrow here showing us that this is where we start from. So although that you can create something like this, and I'll run this in a minute, but you can create something like this with using like a tab view controller or whatever. The author, as he often does, literally starts from scratch. So that's what we're going to end up doing. I'm going to just follow the stuff that the author goes through. And as he says here, table views and navigation controllers work hand in hand, especially on smaller devices. Not so much on an iPad, but very much so on an iPhone. All right. So it says in this chapter, like we did back in Chapter 7 with the Pickers program, and I like it when he does this, he's only going to do one application, and he's going to build it progressively. So in other words, he's going to build some code. He's going to talk about some concepts, have you put in some code, and then run it. Talk about some more concepts, put in some more code, and run it. I think that works better myself. So what we learn in this chapter, as it says, is how to drill down from table views into child table views. In other words, how to go from one form, if you want to call it that, to another. How to drill down from table views into content views, where detailed data can be viewed and edited. How to use multiple sections within a table view. How to use edit mode to allow rows to be deleted from a table view, how to use edit mode to let users reorder rows within a table view. And although the author says it's a lot, and I guess it is, I'm hoping to go through the first half or so right now, and we'll see how it goes from there. So the main tool that we'll be using again is the UI navigation controller. Notice as mentioned, it's similar to the tab bar controller that we used in the last chapter in that it swaps in and out multiple views. The main difference between these is the navigation view controller is implemented as a stack. Now the author talks about stack here and stacky goodness, and you may or may not even remember this, but I actually passed out this little section that's in the middle of page 300 and whatever it is, 302. I passed it out to the class. And the author equates a stack to a Pez dispenser. Let's talk about something that may or may not make more sense. I don't know. But imagine you go into the Blackhawk Technical College cafeteria and you want to have lunch. And you notice that there's a group of trays right over where you want to go order your lunch from. So you grab the top tray. You go over, you tell the cafeteria person what you want, they give it to you, etc. You put it on your tray and you go pay for it. All right? The next person goes and grabs the next tray off, and the same thing happens. Well, the reason I'm telling you this is that, as they mention here, a computer kind of follows the same rules when you work with a stack. When you add things to the stack, it's called a push. You push objects onto the stack. So when the cafeteria worker comes in and he or she pushes down a bunch of those trays, they're pushing things onto the stack. The first object that you push onto the stack, and that's going to be the one on the bottom, is called the base of the stack. The last one that you push is called the top of the stack. And when you remove an object from a stack, it's called a pop. When you add an object to a stack, it's called a push. when you pop an object off of a stack, it's always the last one. So it goes by what's called the LIFO property, L-I-F-O. Last in is the first out. All right. Conversely, the first object you push onto the stack will always be the last one you pop off. So that's FILO. So that's first in, last out. All right. And as the author mentions here on the bottom of page 302, the navigation controller maintains a stack of view controllers. So the navigation controller acts kind of like the root view controller that we've talked about in previous chapters. It's going to decide which controller or which view or whatever you want to call it currently shows on screen. So the view controller, the one that's in charge of it is called the root view controller or the view controller, and the other ones are called subcontrollers. All right, we'll get to a little bit more on verbiage as we go on through here. So the author shows an example of how some of this stuff is going to look. Now this is not the example that we're building in the chapter, but if you look in here, the author mentions, and this is figure 9.1 that's on page 303, and he says the title is centered in the navigation bar. You've got a back button. The title of the navigation bar is populated with the title of the top view controller, and the back button is populated with the title of the previous view that was in here. The back button is similar to a web browser's back button. When the user taps it, the current view controller is popped off the stack and the previous one becomes the current view. And the author mentions after that, a little bit later on page 303 here, that he loves this design pattern because it allows you to build complex hierarchical applications iteratively. So in other words, in a stepwise or a step-by-step kind of format. We don't need to know the entire hierarchy to get things up and running. Each controller only needs to know about its child controller so it can push the appropriate new controller object onto the stack when it makes a selection. And again, that's what we're going to talk about in this chapter. Now this is just an introduction to it. So again, as it says, the navigation controller is the heart and soul of many iPhone apps, but when it comes to iPad apps, it takes a more marginal role, so it's not as important. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more depth and breadth of coverage when we get to Chapter 11. All right, so here, what you see on page 304, this is the app that we build in this chapter. All right? So there it is. And the author mentions, this application we're about to build will show you how to do most of the common tasks associated with displaying a hierarchy of data. When the app launches, you'll be presented with a list of font families that are included with iOS. And that's what's shown here in figure 9-2, although it says 9.1 for some reason here. Oh, because there we go. There we go. And a font family is mentioned on the top of page 304 is a group of closely related fonts. For instance, as mentioned, Helvetica, Helvetica Bold, Helvetic Oblique, etc. They're all variations of the Helvetica family. So when you select a row at the top level, all right, so anything like that's up here, it'll push a view controller onto the navigation controller stack. The icons that are on the right-hand side, they're very hard to see here, but you can see them easier if you go and look at the actual app running, and we'll do that in just a minute. They're called accessory icons. All right. The gray arrow, and that's what this is here. Like I said, I'm sorry, I'll have to run it for you in just a minute. It's called a disclosure indicator. Its presence lets you know that touching it will drill down even further so that you can see yet another table view. So in fact, let's see if we can go in here before we go on too much and see if we can run this. Build failed. Well, not a good sign. What that means again, and I've had one student, Teresa, and when she got her own Mac, she loaded the newest version of Xcode onto her machine, which she said was 6.2. I believe we're running 6.1.1 here, and I believe the author was running 6.01. So hopefully I'm going to be able to make whatever changes need to be made as we come in to build this to get this to work. Again, in the previous chapter, in Chapter 8, there were 4 apps that were in there. I got the first 3 to build, but the last one I couldn't get to build. So, we'll go back, and for now at least, we'll just look at it here. Alright, so the author next starts talking about the different subcontrollers. And he says, touching any row of the table that you see here in the previous example, where we saw this here, so touching any row here, so imagine you come in here and you grab this Arial, rounded, MT, bold, or whatever. So you grab that. What that's going to do is it's going to bring up a child view. And the child view that it brings up is not the one that I just mentioned, but it'll be the one associated with the font that you just chose. All right. As they mentioned here, now you can see these come out a little bit better. But it says now this accessory icon is a bit different. Rather than being a gray arrow, all right, it's a blue question mark. I'm sorry, a blue I for information, and it's known as a detailed disclosure button. It's not just an icon, it's a control that you can tap. So you have 2 options available for a row. One action is triggered when you select the row, and another is going to be triggered again. And this will give you more information. So tapping that button should allow the user to view and perhaps even edit the detailed information about the current row. So the presence of a right-pointing arrow in here, whether it's an arrow, whether it's an eye or whatever, what that's telling you is, hey, there's more information in here. So you can drill down, which is the way it's typically referred to. So if you touch one of those, so again, the author is assuming that right here, you touched one of these things for the Gill Sans, so one of those eyes. When you did, it brought up even more information. All right, which has the different font sizes in there. And notice it goes from 9 point all the way up to right here. It looks like about 48 point or something like that. So if you want to offer the user a single choice for tapping a row, you don't use any accessory icons. You use the disclosure icon, the right pointing arrow, if a row tap will lead to a new view listing more items. If you want to offer 2 choices, you mark the row with either the detail disclosure indicator or a detail button. So the idea is, again, you want to allow the user the ability to go in and tap something and find out more information about whatever it is they're looking for. All right? The final application subcontroller, and this is the only one that's not a table view, is the one that's shown here on page 307. And it says this is the view that appears when you tap on the info icon for any row in the font list controller that we saw earlier. This view lets you drag a slider, and you can see the slider out here, to adjust the size of the displayed font. It also, and it's a little hard to see here, but it has one of those switcher controls. And if you turn it on, you're allowed to set that font as one of your favorites. So again, you can see where we will build this iteratively, and we'll do a little bit at a time, which is exactly what the author wanted to go through here. So Xcode offers a good template for navigation-based applications, and you'll use that most of the time, but as the author says, he doesn't like to do that the first time he shows it. So it says we're not going to use that application today. Instead, we'll construct our navigation-based application from the ground up, meaning just we'll add the pieces in as we need it. So we'll start with a simple single-view project, and we'll walk our way through it then. All right, so again, as always, I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth between here, where we are on page 308, all right, and then going into Xcode and actually making some changes. So I'm going to take this one, since it's not running right now anyway, and I'm going to close this project, and I'm going to start up a new project. So you want you to choose single view and just call it fonts. All right, Swift and Universal. And we'll save this right to the desktop when it comes up. As always, I'll come up to my view controller here, change my size to 4" so it's a little bit easier to work with. Okay. All right. Now jumping back into the book, and I'm going to keep this up on the screen, but I'm going to go over all the material that's on page 308 in your book. This is setting up the navigation controller. So the author says we now need to create the basic navigation structure for our application. At the core of this will be a UI navigation controller, which manages the stack of view controllers the user uses to navigate between, and a UI table view controller that shows the top level list of rows we're going to display. Now, the author says here, as it turns out, Interface Builder makes this remarkably easy to do, but the first time you do it, it may or may not seem remarkably easy. Alright, so select the main storyboard. I've already done this. The template has created a basic view controller for us, but we need to use a navigation controller instead. So it says select the view controller in either the editor area or document outline. So I'm going to come into document outline here, and I'm going to select the view controller just as the author says. And delete it. Okay, so we have nothing here now. Notice that our document outline is empty. There literally is nothing. All right. Now use the object library to search for a UI navigation view controller. And there it is, the navigation controller right there. And drag an instance into the editing area. It says you'll see that you actually get 2 scenes instead of 1. So let's see what happens when we do this. So I'm dragging it in and letting go. Okay, so let me remove some of this stuff so hopefully it's a little bit easier to see. So when you look in here now, there's our navigation controller, and it also created a root view controller underneath there. All right, it says on the left is the navigation controller itself. Select this controller, and I like to do this, and I like to have the document outline open to make sure I'm selecting what I think I'm selecting. All right, so I'm selecting that navigation view controller. Open the Attributes Inspector. And check the Is Initial View Controller in the View Controller section. Right there. And again, what we're basically saying is this is what we want to use to start the program with. All right. All right, the UI navigation controller has a connection wired to a second scene, and that's the one that you see right here, okay, which contains a UI table view controller. You'll see that the table has the title Root View Controller. So we're told to click on that, click on the title right there, open the Attributes Inspector, so there's the title, open the Attributes Inspector, and we're told to set the title to fonts. And you can see it has been. It says it's worth taking a moment to think about this. What exactly do we get by configuring our application to load the initial scene from this storyboard? First, we get the view created by the navigation controller, which is a composite view containing a combination of the navigation bar at the top of the screen and often a back bar to display some comment, and then the content of whatever the navigation controller's current view controller wants to display. In our case, the lower part of the display will be filled with the table view that was created alongside the navigation controller. All right. It says you'll learn more about how to control what the navigation controller shows in the navigation bar as the chapter goes on. And we'll also get a better understanding of how navigation controller, how it can shift the focus from one view controller to another. All right. So at this point it says the application skeleton is essentially complete. It says you might see a warning about a reuse identifier, but we can ignore that for now. Save the files, build and run the app. Okay. If all goes well, it says the application should launch and a navigation bar with the title fonts should appear. You haven't given the table view any information about what to show yet, so no rows will display at this time. So it should look similar to what you see in figure 9.6 that is on the top of page 309. We're going to check right now to see if indeed that's the case. As always, since I'm just starting up, I might have to let this run. I may even have to open it a couple times. You've seen this before. So as I'm waiting for this to load, I'm just going to go on a little bit to the bottom of page 309. The author mentions here at several points in the app, we're going to let the user maintain a list of favorite fonts by letting them add chosen fonts, view their list of already chosen fonts, and remove fonts from the list. In other words, they've got insert, update, and delete capabilities, CRUD type of capabilities. Okay. In order to manage this list in a consistent way, we're going to make a new class that we will hang onto an array of favorites and then store them in the user's preferences settings for the app. Now we're just going to start talking about user preferences, but it's the whole idea behind Chapter 12, so you'll see it more then. All right, so there it is. Okay, so far so good. It's always a good start. Always good to build this thing incrementally and create it incrementally, and it's also a good idea to be saving regularly. All right, so we're told to start by creating a new class. It says select the Swifts folder, select the fonts folder, sorry. So we're supposed to come back in here, so I like to do it like this. View, Navigator, Show Project Navigator. So select the font folder, do a Command N, all right. To bring up the new file assistant, select Swift file from the iOS selection. That's the first time I think we're doing that. And then click on Next. On the following screen, we're supposed to name the new file favoritesList.swift. FavoritesList.swift. And then click on Next, or press Create, I'm sorry. We're told next to select the new file that we just created. All right. And you can see it right here. So the only thing that's in here right now, got all this, and the import foundation. So I'm going to add the code that is in bold on the bottom of page 309 and the top half of page 310, and then we'll go over and look at the code that we just added. So we start by importing UI kit so that we're able to do things, I don't know if you'd call it all things, but we're able to do things GUI. In some ways, at least, this particular example is going to look a little bit more C-like, C programming language-like than some of the stuff that we've done before. Well, that didn't look good. Like I said, there's a lot of different things that are in here that we have not yet talked about. So after I get done putting in the code, I'll go back and explain as the author explains, or to the best of my capabilities. All right, I'll explain what's shown in the book on the bottom half of page 310. And as I've told you in several other lectures, one of the reasons that I'm actually taking the time to put in this stuff is when people tell me, well, geez, you know, you might have time to do all that, but I don't. And I understand that. We're all busy, but I'm making time. Morning. Just so you're aware of this, if you haven't heard, they're doing a power reset. You might not have access to anything other than your C drive.
For how long?
It's supposed to be done already, but they said that it might run later. I had to wait outside for 15 minutes this morning for somebody to open the door for me because it's all electronic, and I had to wait till somebody had a key fob and could let me in.
Well, hopefully it wasn't raining.
Yeah, it was.
That's
Not hard, though. As always, I'm going to add a little bit of blank space in here to make it easier for us to read this. Now I'm getting my first error message here. Oh, because we're about to write save favorites, so don't worry about that. So we're going to get the same error here, the same save favorites, and we're going to write that next, literally in a matter of minutes. I should say a matter of seconds. Bless you. Okay, and you can see all of our errors have gone away now, which is, as always, is a good thing. So as means of explanation, let's move this up just a little bit and take it from the top. We declared the API for our new class. First, we created a class property called shared favorite list, and that returns an instance of the class. No matter how many times we call this method, we'll only have one set of favorites. So we made this a singleton, meaning that rather than using multiple instances, literally the biggest number of instances we can have is just one, and that's all we'll use throughout the application. The implementation of the property the author mentions here is probably a little bit convoluted because Swift does not support class properties. Alright, so the way we have to do this is more C-like by creating a structure, as you can see with that struct singleton. Why? Because only structures support class properties as of right now. So then in the implementation of the shared list favorite list property, it just returns the value of the structure's instant property. Swift initializes static properties lazily and in a thread-safe way, so it won't be created until the shared favorite list property is read for the first time. Next, we declare the property to hold the name for the fonts, and again, this looks a little bit funky right here on line 24. Private, then in parentheses, set, var favorites, colon, string, in brackets. The private qualifier means that the array can be read by code outside of the class, but only code inside of the class can modify it, and that's what we want. Alright, and they show you the fact that you'll have basically read access, alright. They show you what's good, what's okay, and what's not okay in the book on page 311. The class initializer then with the init, that's responsible for setting the initial content of the favorites array. Anytime we add something to or remove something from the array, we save its contents to the application's user default, which again is the subject of Chapter 12, so that the content of the list is preserved over application restarts. In other words, you want the data to remain. In this initializer, we check whether we have a stored favorites list, and if we do, we use it to initialize the favorites property. If we don't, we simply make it an empty one. The remaining three methods deal with adding to and removing from the favorites array. It says you'll learn more about how all of this stuff works with the NS user defaults in Chapter 12. For now, suffice to say that the NS user defaults object that's used here acts kind of like a persistent dictionary. Anything we put in there will be available the next time we ask for it, even if the app has been stopped and restarted. So our next step, starting on the bottom of page 311, is to create the root view controller. So as the author says, now we're ready to start working on our first view controller. In the previous chapter, we used a simple array of strings to populate our table rows. We're going to do something similar here, but this time we'll use the UI font class to get a list of font families. So in other words, that already exists, and we're going to bring it into our program. And then we'll use the name of those font families to populate each row. We'll also use the fonts themselves to display the font names so that each row will contain a small preview of what that font family actually contains. Alright, it says it's time to create the first controller class for the app. The template created a view controller for us, but its name, view controller, isn't very useful because we're going to use it several controllers in the app. So the first thing that we're asked to do, and I believe it's going to be easiest if we go back, let's see. We want to select viewcontroller.swift right here. And press delete to remove it, throw it in the trash. Then again, we're supposed to do a command N. This time, rather than Swift file, we're going to choose Cocoa class from the iOS section and click Next. On the following screen, we're going to create a new class that's called Root View Controller. And under subclass of, what we want to choose right here is UI Table View Controller. Well, you don't see it right now, but I think if I start typing, we'll see it. There's UI Table View Controller right there. All right, then we want to click Next. And finally, we want to click Create. Okay, and there it is. Move it over to here so I have it where I want it to be. Go. If we bring it up, you'll notice that right now there's, well, not too much in it. How's that? And I'm wondering why I'm importing Cocoa here. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to just take that and comment it out, and I think that that'll be fine if we do that. But so class root view controller, and it inherits from UI table view controller. Good. All right. Putting in the code that you see in the book near the top of page 312. So as the author mentions here, let's see. I'm going to try to import UI kit here and see if that's going to remove some of those errors, and it looked like, at least for now, it did. Okay. So it says we'll assign the first three values to the first three of the properties from the outset. So that's the private vars that you see right there. The family names array will contain a list of all the font families that are going to be displayed. The cell point size contains the font size we want to use in all of the table view cells. And the favorite list will be a pointer to our favorite list singleton. The last two things that we see in there, the lets, those are constants representing cell identifiers that we use for the table view cells in the controller. All right. So it says set up all of this class's properties by adding the bold code here in the viewDidLoad method. Well, I didn't get anything when I brought this in, so I have to put in that viewDidLoad method. It says in this snippet of code that we have right here, we populated family names by asking the UI font class for all known family names, and then we sorted the array that we got back. We used the UI font again to ask for the preferred font for use in a headline. We did this using a piece of functionality added in iOS 7, which builds on the font size setting that can be specified in the Settings app. The dynamic font sizing lets the user set an overall font scaling mechanism for system-wide use. And in this case, we're using the font's point size property to establish a baseline font size we can use elsewhere in the view controller. Okay? All right, it says before we go on, let's delete the did receive memory warning. So again, I think I set this up incorrectly, and that's probably why mine doesn't even have that in there, so I don't have to worry about it. Let's see if I fix this. Family names. Okay. All right. It says the idea behind this view controller is to show two sections. The first section is a list of available font families. The second section or selection is for the favorites, and it'll contain just a single entry that will lead the user to a list of their favorite fonts. All right. As of right now, the user has no favorites, so we'd rather not show the second section at all. All right, turning up to page 313, we'll have to do a few things throughout the rest of this class to compensate for this eventuality. The first is to implement a method which is called just before the root view controller's view appears on screen. All right, we've looked at this kind of thing before. Let me move this up a bit. I have to, again, add some blank lines in here. All right. As the author says in the middle of page 313, there may be times when the set of things we're going to display might change from one viewing to the next. For example, the user may start with no favorites and then drill down, select a font, choose it as a favorite, and then come back to the root view. So at that time, we'll need to reload the table view, and that's the reason for the reload data here. Next, we're going to implement sort of a utility method for use in this case. At a couple of points in here, as the author mentions, we'll be configuring the table view using its data source methods, and we'll need to be able to figure out which font we want to display in the cell. So we're going to take that and put it into its own method. It's gotten rid of all the errors. And the author says this method uses the UI font class first to find all the font names for the given family name and later to grab the first name within that family. We don't necessarily know that the first name is the best one to use to represent, but it's just the one the author decided to use. All right. So we have to go in and put in a number of sections and table here. Again, I'm going to have to put in some blank area so I can move that up. We use the favorite list to determine whether we want to show the second section or not. So in other words, if there's nothing in it, we don't want to show it. All right. We also have to come in here and override the table view function, which we'll do in just a second. I'm getting an error, so I want to see if I can figure out what that is. That could be it. Okay, that looks better.
Is your computer working fine over there?
So what they're saying in here is we use the section number to determine whether the section is showing all the family names or just a single cell linking to the list of favorites. Now we have to define one other method, which is an optional method we have to put in the UI table view data source protocol that lets us specify the title for each of our sections. And again, this uses the section number to determine which header to use. Okay? All font families or my favorite fonts. There's one final one in here that we have to set up. One final method that every table view data source must implement. All right? And it's the one for configuring each cell. So the one that we're about to create, again, I'm going to move this down a little bit to give myself some room, is shown on the middle of page 314 in the book. as you can see, I've got a few errors here, so let's see if we can fix those first. Then we'll go over the explanation of what is wrong here. Well, that should be path. Okay, well, that got rid of one and not the other one. So cell with identifier, family cell, path, UI table view cell. As far as I can tell, that looks okay, but there's something it doesn't like on there. It says when we created this class, we defined two different cell identifiers that we used to load the two different cell prototypes from the storyboard. We haven't configured those cell prototypes yet, but we will soon. And I guess that's what where we're getting the errors. Next, we use the section number to determine which of those cells we want to show for the current index path. If the cell is meant to contain a font family name, then we put the family name into both its label and detail label. All right. And I wanted to get a little bit further today, so initial storyboard setup. So I'm jumping back to your handout, and I'm on page 314. I'm going to save first before I jump back into the PDF. So we're making some progress here. Bottom of the page here, so this is what I just put into the code. I just manually typed it in. So on the bottom of the page under the initial storyboard setup here, the author says, now that we have a view controller that we think should show something, let's configure the storyboard to make things happen. Select the main storyboard. From the project navigator, you'll see that the navigation controller and the table view controller we added earlier. The first thing we need to configure is the table view controller. By default, the controller's class is set to UI table view controller. We need to change that. In the document outline, select the yellow icon labeled root view controller. So let's go, there it is. And then use the identity inspector to change the class to root view controller. Okay. Move this up to page 315. The other configuration we need to do right now is to set up a pair of prototype cells to match the cell identifiers we used in our code. From the start, the table view has a single prototype cell right here. We are supposed to select that single prototype cell and press Command D to duplicate it. Don't know if I did that correct or not. It doesn't look, well, let's back that up. Okay, hopefully we did that correctly. Alright, it says select the first one and then go over to the attributes inspector. Set its style to subtitle. Set its identifier to family name and its accessory to disclosure indicator. Next, select the second prototype cell. Set its style to basic. its identifier to favorites, and its accessory to disclosure indicator. Also, double-click the title shown and change it from title to favorites. It says, now build and run the app on the device of the simulator, and you should see a nice list of fonts as shown in figure 9.7 on the bottom of page 315. Scroll around a bit and you'll see that not all the fonts produce the same text of the same height. Scroll to the end, for example, and you'll see that the sample text for Zappino font is much larger than all the others, as you can see on the bottom of figure 9.7 on page 315. Despite this, all the cells are tall enough to contain their content, even though we didn't do anything special to make this happen. So let's save, and let's try running it again and see exactly what happens. And if for some reason this build fails, then I'm just done for right now. Otherwise, I'm going to go on and go a little bit further. Build failed. Okay. So I'll have to go back and figure out where the errors were. And I guess this is as good a place to stop as any. So I'll pick this up with part 2 later.